Okay, let's unpack this. You've brought us a fascinating stack of material focused on the journey of Anil Ambani. I mean, a man who went from being among the world's wealthiest to, well, at one point, declaring his net worth was zero.
It's a genuinely dramatic arc, yeah. And these sources, they give us a chance to look past the headlines, you know?
Right.
They include his own reflections from a candid conversation, apparently. But crucially, they're anchored by hard financial data and, well, key judicial findings.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is really to get past the sensational stuff. We're
Yeah.
using this material to try and understand how this happened, why it happened, what lessons maybe he draws from it, and, well, where he is today.
Yeah, we're looking for the real story behind it all, the key decisions, those external forces, maybe some surprising turns.
The nuance.
Exactly, the nuance that often gets lost in the simpler accounts.
And look, this isn't about judgment, right? It's about extracting knowledge from this incredible story, ambition, collapse, and maybe even resilience. So get ready for a deep dive into the complex reality behind a very public fall.
Let's do it.
So where do we start? You almost have to begin with the foundation, the legacy of Dhirubhai Ambani.
Absolutely. I mean, their father built an extraordinary empire. After he passed away in 2002, Anil and his older brother, Mukesh, they jointly oversaw the group for a bit.
Right.
But by 2005, things had changed, and there was that formal family split.
And that split, famously brokered by their mother, wasn't it? Mukesh took the traditional core, the petrochemicals, oil and gas, refining,
Yeah, the cash cows, really.
while Anil got the newer, more future-facing ventures, telecom, power, financial services, entertainment, infrastructure, quite a portfolio.
And, you know, in those first few years, right after the split, Anil's side of the empire just shot up. I mean, Reliance Communications, Arcom, it quickly became India's second largest mobile operator.
Huge growth. And his financial services arm, Reliance Capital, the valuation just soared, didn't it?
Oh, massively. By 2007, it was over, 70,000 crore. And for a short time, it was actually valued more than HDFC Bank.
Wow, more than HDFC. That's incredible. He clearly had ambitions to build a top-tier financial institution.
Absolutely, and it looked completely possible back then.
And then there was Reliance Power. That 2008 IPO was absolutely massive, wasn't it? Raised something like $3 billion.
Yeah, $3 billion.
Yeah.
Just shows the huge market confidence in his vision for the power sector at that point.
And he wasn't just sticking to those core areas. He was diversifying like crazy, that joint venture with Spielberg's DreamWorks in Hollywood.
Right, the entertainment play.
Plus local movie production, gaming with Zapak. It really felt like the 80-day group was pushing into every promising new sector.
Yeah, it did. And those early successes, they were definitely fueled by that ambitious diversification and, frankly, a real knack for tapping the capital markets. That Reliance Power IPO is the perfect example.
And some genuine operational success too, right? Arcom's subscriber growth, those early profitable power projects.
For sure. There was real substance there initially.
It felt like incredible momentum. But the material you've shared points out that even then, even at the peak, the seeds of future trouble were kind of being sown. What were those?
Well, basically, underneath all that rapid expansion, the group was taking on a lot of debt, significant debt.
Leverage.
Yeah. The empire was getting very big, very fast, maybe overextended even before the global economy took that nosedive.
Right. And that confidence you mentioned, it peaked around 2008.
Which is precisely the wrong moment, wasn't it? The global financial crisis hits, credit markets just freeze up worldwide.
And instead of pulling back, the decision was made to push ahead, aggressively. He apparently reflects now that they maybe underestimated the storm.
Yeah, seems like it. Despite that massive liquidity crunch everywhere, the spending, the investment just kept going. You see it across the board. The DreamWorks deal, buying global cloud exchange for undersea cables.
Entering defense with Pipavav Shipyard.
Right, buying the Zapak gaming portal, UTV's TV business, even snapping up a smaller telecom player, MTS India. Just relentless expansion.
That sounds like a huge amount to juggle, especially when money's getting tight. And looking back, the material suggests a lot of these big bets were just poorly timed.
Exactly. This huge push, especially into infrastructure with those massive power projects under Reliance Power, it just stretched the group's finances incredibly thin.
Yeah.
Right when they could least afford it.
And that's when you start seeing the real world problems, right? Those roadblocks,
Yeah.
land acquisition delays, environmental hurdles.
Oh, yeah. And massive uncertainty around fuel supplies for the power plants.
Right.
That huge Krishnapatnam project, for instance,
Yeah.
4,000 megawatts.
Huge.
It basically became unviable overnight because Indonesia changed its coal export laws, made the fuel costs shoot up.
Wow, just like that.
And then the Talaya project in Harkand, another big one, it just stalled for years.
Yeah.
Government delays, getting land, sorting out the coal linkages, just stuck.
So these grand visions for power, they just got bogged down in the messy reality of building big infrastructure in India.
Pretty much. And one of the key lessons that comes through is that structural mistake. Taking on mountains of debt, expecting massive growth.
Right.
When that growth hit these roadblocks or just didn't materialize fast enough, the debt just became this crushing weight.
And Arcom, Reliance Communications, seems like the perfect example of this. It borrowed huge amounts for spectrum network upgrades.
Yeah, and Arcon had that legacy problem too, the big investment in CDMA technology.
Ah, right. Well, everyone else was going GSM, then 4G.
Exactly. So Arcom had to spend massively, expensively, and frankly, too late, just trying to catch up. He apparently said they effectively bet on the wrong horse technologically.
That's a tough position.
Yeah, and it cost them dearly. That combination, high debt and a really expensive tech pivot, it just hammered Arcom's stability.
So you had these internal challenges, strategic choices going wrong, but then external factors started piling on too, right around the early 2010s.
Absolutely. Major headwinds. Things beyond their direct control started hitting hard.
Like that legal battle with his brother, Mukesh. Didn't that scupper a potentially crucial deal for Arcom?
That's right, yeah. Back in 2010, Anil was deep in talks to sell a big stake in Arcom to MTN Group from South Africa. Could have brought in vital cash, a strategic partner.
Lifeline, possibly.
Could have been, but Mukesh invoked a right of first refusal based on an old family agreement. Blocked the deal. Huge missed opportunity for Arcom.
Wow. Then the whole telecom sector in India got thrown into chaos after that 2012 Supreme Court ruling on the 2G scam, canceling loads of licenses.
Yeah, even though Arcom's own licenses weren't canceled in that ruling, the whole situation created massive uncertainty. Investors, lenders, everyone just got really nervous about the entire telecom sector.
Understandable.
And then, boom, another hit in the power sector. 2014, the Supreme Court cancels a whole bunch of coal mining allocations. Coalgate. That directly impacted Reliance Power, messing up fuel supply plants for several plants.
Just one thing after another.
Pretty much. And on top of all that specific sector turmoil, India's overall economy slowed down quite a bit between 2011 and 2013.
Right.
And interest rates are going up. So if you're a company loaded with debt you took on expecting boom times.
Makes it much, much harder to pay it back.
Exponentially harder. And while Anil Ambani kept up a brave face publicly, the material shows the strain was really building internally. Credit ratings agencies started downgrading the group companies pretty significantly by the mid-2010s.
He apparently acknowledges now they maybe expanded faster than the ecosystem allowed, that diversification, which looked like a strength early on.
Yeah, it became a major weakness when things went sour across multiple fronts at the same time.
Telecom, power, finance, defense, each had its own risks.
And it felt like a perfect storm, really. Internal issues, external shocks, all hitting around the claim period.
So if we zoom in on Arcom again, it really does seem to embody that whole rise and fall narrative, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The flagship. Once the #2 mobile player in India.
But by mid-2010s, just drowning in debt. You mentioned the figure around $7 billion owed by March 2017.
Yeah, an almost unimaginable number. And the last real hope to sort it out was that asset sale plan.
Selling the towers and fiber network to Mukesh's Reliance Jio.
Exactly. Seemed logical, keep it in the family, resolve the debt.
But then came what he apparently calls the cruel twist of fate.
Yeah, that crucial deal collapsed in early 2019. Just couldn't get the necessary regulatory green lights, lender approvals. It just died.
Wow.
He apparently said that was the moment the last hope slipped away. With that deal gone, he felt there was no choice but to admit Arcom into bankruptcy proceedings.
That's when he lost control.
Effectively, yes. Lost control of the company he'd built.
And Gio's role in all this is obviously huge, though the material says his perspective is, without bitterness, seeing it as creative destruction.
Well, Jio's launch in 2016, with those super low, even free tariffs.
Yeah.
It just blew up the market, triggered a brutal price war.
Great for consumers, terrible for the existing players.
Especially for players like Arcom, already weighed down by debt and older infrastructure. Jio had Mukesh's deep pockets, could afford to lose money initially, build a brand new 4G network.
While Arcom was stuck, saddled with debt, legacy tech, just couldn't compete on price or invest enough.
Subscriber base just melted away. He called it a telecom hurricane. And it's important, it wasn't just Arcom suffering.
Right. Others collapsed too.
Yeah, lots of other operators either had to merge or just exit the market completely.
Yeah.
Shows how intense the pressure was across the board.
So Arcom shuts down consumer operations in late 2017, defaults in 2018, and then formally enters that IBC bankruptcy process in 2019, the end of the road for that ambition.
And the stock price just tells the whole story, doesn't it? From over 750 pounds a share in 2008.
Yeah.
Down to about D2 by 2019. It's a 99.7% wipeout. It apparently said that number speaks louder than any words.
Just devastating. Does he address the criticism that maybe Arcom just didn't invest enough in 4G, didn't see the future coming?
He does touch on that. He argues they did try to pivot to 4G, even had spectrum sharing deals, including with Jio, but the timing was just awful, and they simply ran out of cash before they could properly upgrade the whole network.
So trapped.
Yeah. And he points to the broader industry consolidation, all the other collapses, as proof it wasn't just Arcom's mistakes, but massive systemic stress, too.
So Arcom's end wasn't one single thing. It was this convergence, overcrowded market, Jio's disruption, that massive debt, the legacy tech issues, and regulatory hurdles all piling on.
A perfect storm, really.
Okay, so while telecom was imploding, what about those other big bets, power and infrastructure?
Well, Reliance Power's story is almost a textbook case, isn't it? That huge IPO success versus the reality of projects hitting the buffers. He reflects it was a lesson in the best-laid plans often going awry.
You had Sasan, that ultra-mega power plant, which actually got built.
Right, one success story there.
But then those other massive projects, Krishnapatnam, Talaya, they just never happened.
And again, the material points to those critical regulatory and macro factors. The Indonesia coal law change killed Krishnapatnam financially.
Right.
Talaya got stuck for years in government delays land, coal linkages, the usual infrastructure nightmares, really.
And the 2014 Supreme Court coal block cancellation hit them too?
Yeah, disrupted fuel security for other plants as well. He apparently described operating in India's infrastructure space then as treacherous. A tough lesson in how policy risk can completely derail things.
So Reliance Power ends up with fewer projects, massive debt, and that stock price collapse mirroring Arcom's from, 450 down to single digits?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he had to give up control of some projects to the lenders just to try and get some debt relief.
And Reliance Infrastructure, the story sounds similar there.
Very similar.
Right.
That housed various projects plus the defense manufacturing after buying Pipavov shipyard. Same problems. Debt piling up, ventures not performing as hoped.
Had to sell off assets just to survive.
Yeah. Sold the cement business, the Mumbai power distribution arm went to Adani, sold off toll roads, basically trying to plug holes, and it also faced insolvency petitions from creditors.
It sounds like a complete fire sale, just trying to stay afloat across the board. But the material, looking ahead to mid-2025, mentions something surprising. Recent signs of a modest recovery for these two companies.
Yeah, and this is where the narrative takes a slight turn, maybe. Reliance Infrastructure, which was staring down insolvency, they actually managed to avert it just recently, June 2025.
How?
Well, an appellate tribunal, the NCLA, suspended the proceedings after the company settled a key debt about 93 crore, managed to pay it off.
Okay, avoiding the immediate cliff edge. And didn't they also win a new defense contract?
That's right. Reports mention a new 5,000 crore deal for aircraft upgrades. Significant.
And crucially,
Reliance Infrastructure announced it hit zero net debt by March 2025 and returned profitability. And its stock price apparently more than doubled in the first half of 2025.
wow. Okay, it's small compared to the past heights, but that's notable.
Definitely notable. A small comeback, but a comeback nonetheless.
And Reliance Power, similar signs.
Also showing some stabilization. Slowly chipping away at debt, reporting modest profits, the stock rallied through 2024-25. And they seem to be getting new investors for clean energy, like solar projects.
Interesting. So still very early days, but not quite the complete wipeout narrative anymore for those two specific entities.
Exactly. The focus seems to have shifted drastically towards stabilization, debt reduction, survival.
So the lessons from power and infra seem pretty clear. Chasing scale for scale's sake is dangerous. Policy stability is absolutely vital. And high leverage can just kill you when things go wrong.
Absolutely. And both companies are now laser focused on cutting that debt. It's also worth remembering those other external pressures that hit hard, like the auditor PwC resigning from Reliance Capital in 2019, citing governance concerns.
Right, that was a big deal.
And that whole liquidity crisis after IL&FS and DHFL collapsed in 2018. That really hammered India's shadow banking sector and hurt his financial businesses badly. Those weren't just his problems. They were industry-wide earthquakes that made his specific issues much worse.
Okay, let's pivot to that financial services arm then. Reliance Capital, another area of huge ambition, right? Once valued incredibly highly.
Yeah, aimed to be a financial powerhouse.
Hmm.
But the reports suggest that the drive to survive and grow, especially after the 2008 crisis, led to some practices that, well, caused big trouble down the line.
Like subsidiaries, Reliance Home Finance, Reliance Commercial Finance, engaging in really aggressive lending.
Yeah, and crucially, lending to other companies within his own group. That related party lending.
Always a red flag for regulators.
Often is, yeah, due to potential conflicts of interest. And in this case, reports say these loans eventually defaulted, which came out in later regulatory investigations.
And then, as you mentioned, that 2018 shadow banking crisis hits India, ILNFS, DHFL fail. Confidence evaporates.
Right. And Reliance Capital's structure, already weakened by those lending practices, just started to crumble. The house of cards analogy was used.
Credit ratings slashed.
Investor panic, auditors digging much deeper.
Which led to that huge event in 2019, PwC resigning as auditor from Reliance Capital, specifically flagging concerns about lending transactions and governance.
That was a massive blow. And things just kept getting worse until, in late 2021, the Reserve Bank of India took that unprecedented step. They superseded Reliance Capital's board entirely.
Just took over.
Took over and pushed it into the IBC bankruptcy process. The first major NBFC, non-banking financial company, that the RBI forced into bankruptcy like that.
So a complete loss of control there, too, just like Arcom. And the debt figures were staggering. Reports said over 25,000 crore.
Huge numbers. And then to make matters even worse, a SEBI investigation the securities regulator concluded in 2022 that it found evidence of funds being improperly moved, siphoned from Reliance Home Finance to other entities linked to Ambani.
The SEBI used the term fraudulent diversion, didn't they?
They did. And the consequence was severe. A 5-year ban for Anil Ambani from the securities market, plus a 25 crore fine.
That's a major personal hit. Can't access capital markets, can't hold key jobs in listed companies.
Exactly. Now, the material says he's defending himself against these findings in court, but it also suggests he's reflecting on, where controls and oversight within his group might have failed.
Right.
He apparently emphasizes his actions were meant to save the businesses during a crisis, but recognizes they backfired badly.
And his experience with the bankruptcy system itself, the IBC, sounds like a real shock. He called it a total loss of steering control.
Yeah, finding himself suddenly in the back seat. Resolution professionals appointed by the courts and the creditors, they were making the big decisions about selling off assets, the future of the companies.
A massive shift from being the ultimate boss.
Absolutely. He apparently sees IBC as a necessary reform, bringing discipline, accountability, maybe helping creditors recover more. But he also speaks of the personal pain of seeing life's work effectively auctioned off.
Understandable. And he raised concerns about how long it all takes, right? The Arcom and Reliance Capital processes dragging on for years.
Yeah, that seems to be a common criticism of the IBC process nowadays.
Okay, amidst all these huge corporate collapses and regulatory battles, there was one specific legal case that felt intensely personal. The Ericsson contempt case in 2019.
Yes, that was incredibly dramatic. It started over a relatively small amount, actually about 550 crore owed by Arcom to Ericsson, the Swedish telecom gear maker.
Right, but Arcom didn't pay, despite court orders.
So Ericsson took it all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing contempt.
And the Supreme Court actually found Anil Ambani personally guilty of contempt for willful non-payment.
Yes, and the consequence was stark. 3 months in jail if that 550 crore wasn't paid within 4 weeks. He apparently described it as a moment of great personal peril.
I can imagine. And this is where the family dynamic comes back in a huge way. Right before the deadline, his elder brother, Mukesh Ambani, stepped in.
That's right. Mukesh provided what was described as timely support, reportedly around 460 crore of the amount needed.
Which allowed Anil to pull together the rest and pay Ericsson just hours before he would have faced jail.
Exactly. Saved from imprisonment, dues cleared, contempt purged. But, the reputational cost, the public spectacle, huge.
Anil publicly thanked Mukesh and his wife Nita, didn't he? Talked about family values, solidarity.
He did. It was quite a moment. The billionaire needing a bailout from the brother he'd had that bitter split with years before.
Really underscored that idea, maybe, that blood is thicker than business.
Seemed that way in that instance, definitely. Although it's worth noting, just to add another layer, that a UK court judge later suggested Anil might have been putting a misleading spin on how that help worked in different legal proceedings. So even that wasn't entirely straightforward.
Always complex. Okay, one more major shadow. The Rafale controversy. Now, this wasn't a direct cause of the business collapse, right?
No, not directly, but it got tangled up with everything else and really pulled him into a massive political firestorm in India.
And crucially, it warped public perception, didn't it? Made him look like a beneficiary of crony capitalism just as his empire was visibly crumbling.
Exactly. The core issue was India buying Rafale jets from Dassault in France. Dassault had this offset obligation. They had to invest a chunk of money back into India's defense sector.
Right.
And Dassault chose Anil's relatively new company, Reliance Defense, as one of its Indian offset partners.
Which, given his financial state at the time, immediately sparked accusations, mainly from the political opposition.
Huge allegations of government favoritism. The charge was that the Modi government was improperly helping out a struggling industrialist friend by steering contracts his way. It blew up into the Rafale scam narrative in the media.
Wild figures were thrown around about how much he supposedly benefited.
They were. But the critical point here are the facts, as determined by India's Supreme Court. In December 2018, the court looked into the whole deal very closely.
And their finding.
They dismissed all the allegations of wrongdoing. They found no irregularities, no corruption in the procurement process.
And specifically on that charge about favoritism towards Reliance Defense.
The Supreme Court was crystal clear. They stated the selection of Reliance Defense was purely a commercial decision by Dassault. The court found no evidence of commercial favoritism by the Indian government.
So a complete vindication by the highest court.
Pretty much. And other evidence, like the government auditor's KEG report, also found no government pressure in selecting offset partners and said the pricing was okay.
So it was a tempest of political heat, as the material says, but not much factual light supporting the claims.
Yeah. He apparently reflects it was a harsh lesson in how fast a damaging narrative can stick, especially when you're already seen as vulnerable and easy target.
The irony is just stark, isn't it? Accused of getting this massive euro 30,000 crore windfall from Rafale,
Right.
while simultaneously declaring his net worth was zero and his companies were going bankrupt. The actual offset work was much smaller, spread over years, depended on performance.
And in fact, Reliance Naval, the shipyard meant to do a lot of that work, itself ended up in insolvency proceedings.
So the Rafale thing, despite the court clearing his name, really added insult to injury, fueled that negative public image at the worst possible time.
Yeah. He expresses gratitude for the judicial vindication, stressing the importance of facts, but you get the sense it left deep scars.
Absolutely understandable. So, okay, after all of this, the incredible rise, the breakneck expansion, the collapse across multiple sectors, the personal legal dramas, the regulatory actions, where does that leave Anil Ambani now?
Yeah.
Mid-2025 perspective. Has he just retreated? Is there a second act brewing?
Well, he definitely kept a much lower profile for a long time. A huge change from the high-profile, flamboyant image of the past.
Yeah.
But he hasn't vanished completely. It looks like he is quietly attempting something of a second act, but it's very focused, very different, concentrated on the few remaining pieces of the empire still linked to him.
Which, based on what you said earlier, is primarily Reliance infrastructure and Reliance power.
Exactly. And his role is totally transformed. He's gone from being this visionary tycoon launching new ventures to basically being a turnaround guy for his own struggling companies.
Trying to fix what's left.
Yeah. No more sprawling conglomerate dreams. It's about stabilization, revival of these specific entities.
And we talked about those green shoots, Rel Infra avoiding insolvency, winning that defense contract, reporting zero net debt and profit, the stock surge.
Right. And Rel Power also cutting debt, showing small profits, stock rallying a bit, getting new solar investors. It's modest, yes, but it's movement in a positive direction after years of freefall.
He apparently finds these signs encouraging, sees faith coming back, and interestingly attributes it not just to his teams, but also to the sharp business acumen of the next generation, his sons.
Yeah, Jayanmul and Jayan Shol, they seem to be stepping up, taking more active roles in managing what's left.
So the new strategy seems to be consolidation. Sticking to knitting, as he apparently puts it.
Sounds like it. Reliance Infrastructure, focusing on its core EPC and defense engineering. Reliance Power, pivoting toward clean energy. Nurturing what they know rather than chasing scale everywhere.
And personally, the reports suggest a much more austere lifestyle now. He claimed in the UK court case he didn't have meaningful personal wealth, that family was supporting him.
Yeah, I mean, there's always legal positioning in those claims, obviously, but the sale of luxury assets linked to his companies, the lower public profile. It does suggest a significant scaling down compared to the peak billionaire days.
And he seems to be leaning on personal coping mechanisms, too. He's famously a marathon runner.
Right, bringing that discipline.
Yeah.
And he was seen at spiritual events like the Kumbh Mela, finding solace there, perhaps.
And that mending of ties with Mukesh seems crucial, too. That bailout for Ericsson, reports of informal advice for his sons, suggests an ongoing, if quiet, support system.
Yeah, he expressed his deep gratitude for that renewed bond. That Ericsson moment really does seem symbolic for him, blood thicker than business.
So, summing up his status now, mid-2025. Clearly not the billionaire titan of old, net worth probably hundreds of millions, not billions. Still facing that market ban for a few more years. Many companies gone or controlled by others.
Definitely. A vastly reduced footprint.
But he's not personally bankrupt, and the picture isn't one of despair. It seems more like he's adopted that marathon runner and business mindset you mentioned.
Yeah, patience, grit, acknowledging mistakes, applying a corrected, much more cautious strategy, and just keeping going, one step at a time. The marathon continues, just on a very different course.
So, when you pull it all together, this truly remarkable story, what does it all mean? What are the big themes that jump out from this deep dive?
Well, several things are crystal clear, aren't they? The dangers of overreach, of too much leverage. I mean, those massive debt numbers, the forced asset sales, they speak for themselves.
Undeniable. And the huge, sometimes devastating impact of external shocks and policy risk. The '08 crisis, Jio's entry, those sudden regulatory changes, they weren't just bumps in the road.
No, they were potentially existential threats. And the story also really highlights how vital strong corporate governance and accountability are, particularly with those SEBI findings about fund diversion at Reliance Capital.
Yeah.
It wasn't all external factors.
Right. There were internal failures, too. But it's also a story about maybe resilience, the power of personal support, family support, and the potential, however hard, to learn from even catastrophic mistakes.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, to contrast that simple, often sensationalized public story of his fall with the much more complex fact-based reality we see in the sources.
Absolutely. You've got court judgments clearing his name on something huge like Rafale,
Right
alongside regulatory bodies pointing to serious governance lapses elsewhere, like at RelCap. The truth is definitely in a complicated gray area.
Anil Ambani himself apparently reflects on it as lesson in extreme success than extreme challenges. He hopes others can learn from his experience what to do, and maybe even more importantly, what not to do.
His journey's definitely not over. Still answerable to courts, regulators. A huge shift from the days of being in total command.
A very humbling shift, you'd imagine.
But those small signs of recovery in the remaining companies, the mended family ties, that shift from flamboyance to focus, it paints a picture of someone adapting, enduring.
Yeah, it does.
Ultimately, his whole saga is just this incredibly potent case study, isn't it? For anyone in business dealing with ambition, risk, the sheer unpredictability of markets and policy.
Absolutely. It shows fortunes can turn on a dime faster than you can imagine. But maybe it also shows that few failures are truly final if you have the grit and maybe the support to just keep moving forward.
So here's where it gets really interesting, thinking about it all. Considering everything, his own decisions, those powerful external forces, his focus now on just cleaning up the debt and consolidating.
Yeah.
What single aspect of this whole story do you think is the most critical lesson for business leaders listening today? What really stands out to you?